Have you ever gone to hit your kick drum and it sounds something like this? In today's video, I'm going to show you how to go about tuning my bass drum using the TuneBot and how to get the most out of your kick drum. My channel is all about music lessons and tips just like this video here, so if that's an interest of yours, please hit the subscribe button and you won't miss out on any of the future content. Now, a lot of you are like Ron Swanson in that as soon as I ask you to hit the subscribe button, you said, no, I'm not going to do that.
Normally, if given a choice between doing something and nothing, I'd choose to do nothing. But I will do something if it helps someone else do nothing.
But if I can appeal to you one more time, hit the subscribe button and we'll get on with today's video. Now, if you haven't seen my snare drum tuning video or my TuneBot video, you might want to watch those after you finish this video. I won't spend too much time on the TuneBot. Essentially with the kick drum, you just need your tuning key and maybe a blanket you've got lying around the house. Now, any of the sounds that you're hearing from the kick drum are going to be coming from the Close mic, which is the Shure Beta 52, I believe is what it's called. And it's plugged into the first channel of my interface. I won't process any of this at all, so there won't be any EQ or compression added, but I will try to match the levels just in case I don't get it right. Now, for the testing purposes of this video, I figured it would be easiest for me just to use my fist, and in between the Beta 52 and the hole of the kick drum, I'm trying to align the microphone right in the middle of that hole and also use my fist as kind of the distance between the mic and the kick drum porthole. Now, if I'm miking up the kick drum, I may not necessarily put it right on the hole, but for the purposes of consistency with as much as I'm going to be tuning this kick drum, I figured it'd be easier me just to use my fist's distance, and all the settings on the interface, everything's going to remain the same. There's no EQ or compression added, but if there's a giant level difference, I might try to clip gain between the different samples so that one's not extremely louder than the other. But every time I hit the kick drum pedal, it's going to be a different velocity. I try to be consistent. All that being said, let's get started. First of all, I want to mention there's nothing inside of this kick drum. So it is very boomy. It's got a lot of ringing to it, a lot of sustain, and a lot of body, probably too much body, okay? If you've been to school or a music school or in a chapel somewhere, there's probably a giant timpani, and right now that's what the kick drum sounds like. But we'll get to stuffing the kick drum after we tune the lugs a little bit. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm taking the kick drum, I'm flipping it over, and I want to loosen all of the lugs just like I did on the snare drum video. Once all the lugs are loose, I want to go around and I want to make sure they are all finger tight. Finger tight is basically I'm just taking the loose lugs and I'm tightening them as much as I can with just my fingers, not using any tools, as tight as they possibly can. I thought it'd be interesting to go ahead and show you a sample. Here's what that sounds like if you kick the kick drum finger tight on the batter side and also finger tight on the resonant side. This is what it sounds like. Again, I've got the microphone about a fist's distance away from the resonant side, and I'm trying to point the microphone right in the middle of that hole. And what I'm noticing, as soon as I flip the drum back over, on the resonant side, some of the lugs had already loosened. So just from a few kicks on the kick drum, your lugs are going to be rattling all over the place. I do not recommend that you go with a finger tight on your kick drum. Now, unless you're doing something like jazz or some sort of experimental music, the kick drum is a little bit different than all the other drum pieces because we don't often want the kick drum to have a note value attached to it. Now, I understand you want your kick drum to be as low as possible, but keep in mind the size of your kick drum. The larger your kick drum is, the lower you'll be able to tune the kick drum, the bigger the sound will be. However, you don't want to leave the kick drum finger tight as we heard earlier. You're going to want to give it some sort of tightening so that your lugs just aren't rattling all over the place. If you've got your kick drum tuned as low as you can get it and you're still not happy with the sound of it, you might want to start looking at getting a larger kick drum. John Bonham famously had a giant kick drum, and you can hear the drum sounds that he got. If you're doing pop music, a lot of the time, some of the stuff we hear with Bruno Mars or more of the modern pop stuff is actually a really small kick drum that just gives a little bit of a transient. Now for this kick drum, I know I'm not going to be able to get it to the John Bonham size, but I do want to go around and give it a quarter turn at all of the lugs. Now that we've got it a quarter turn higher than just finger tight, let's hear what that sounds like. All I'm using the TuneBot for when it comes to the kick drum, I'm just curious about what kind of hertz am I getting, what kind of frequency am I getting out of each of the sides of the kick drum. So with this kick drum, at finger tight, it's around 30 or 40, which is way too low. I've heard it said before that the low frequency that impacts our chest is usually between the 60 hertz to 80 hertz region. Now after being finger tight, when I went around the kick drum a quarter turn, I was able to get it up to 60. But with the TuneBot, I'm not necessarily looking for the note value like I mentioned. I just want to see, are the lugs relatively in the same spot? Because the pitch is not very high on each of the lugs, it's not going to be as noticeable if any two lugs are that much out of tune with each other, if that makes sense. Now I did find that on the resonant side of the kick drum, I did turn it up just a little bit more, maybe an eighth or a quarter turn more than I did the batter side. A lot of that has to do with feel. As you're tightening the lugs, make sure you move in a star pattern, as I mentioned in the snare drum video. I go around to each of the lugs and actually use a permanent marker, and the first thing I do is I label each one. I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. This kick drum has 8 lugs to it, so I number them 1 through 8 in a star pattern. So that way I know when I'm going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It keeps me from over tightening any one lug or skipping over one that I missed. So as I mentioned, you don't really need a TuneBot to tune your kick drum at all, okay? If all you're tuning is your kick drum, I wouldn't recommend purchasing a TuneBot. If you have a full drum set, get yourself a TuneBot. The links are in the description below. Now I do have a large tuning key that has a key ring on it. That's always helpful. And you'll also notice that I've got a pair of in-ears. So whenever I'm tuning the kick drum, it's really hard to hear some of the pitches, especially as I'm going around with the lugs. So here's something that I picked up, especially if you're in a bedroom like this. I've got a pair of Shure in-ear monitors. Those are in my ears as I'm tuning. And I've also got these gun mufflers, which are from Holmes. They say Holmes Peltor. Okay, essentially these are what people wear when they go shooting at a shooting range. But what helps is I've got my in-ear monitors on, and that's plugged into a headphone extension cable going to my interface. And then to make sure I'm not hearing anything else in the room, I put these gun mufflers over my in-ear monitors so that I can hear just what the microphone is hearing. Okay, so you'll see me slip these on every now and then. You don't have to have these, but if you're recording drums, what matters most is what is the microphone hearing. And the only way to hear what the microphone is hearing is if you have a pair of headphones on, preferably some in-ear monitors, and then use the gun mufflers so you can isolate as much of that sound as possible. Now just to be clear, first I finger tightened each of the sides. I gave them a quarter turn, and then you're going to want to add either an eighth or another quarter turn on top of the first quarter. Whatever lug that you're tuning, try not to go more than a quarter turn each time. Make sure you move from 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep that star pattern, because if you go to one lug and you give it a whole turn or you give it a half turn, that might set that one lug disproportionate to the rest of the lugs. You want them all to come up gradually together. So my happy place with this kick drum is actually to finger tighten the lugs, give all the lugs a quarter turn, and then give them another quarter turn, really just to make sure that the lugs don't break off or start to loosen up back to finger tight. If a lug starts to loosen too much, you'll hear a lot of rattling, and especially when you're recording, it sounds like this bright metal hitting a bunch of stuff. It's not great. Now the tone is where I want the kick drum to be, but there's far too much sustain. There's too much body to the kick drum. If you don't have a porthole in your kick drum, I actually have a video from like 2 years ago that's still relevant, so go check that out on the link here somewhere. Adding a porthole is not that difficult. They make tools where you can do this with, or you can take a soup can and heat it up on the stove and press it through your kick drum. Mine's got a porthole on the front so I can stuff blankets or pillows, whatever I need to, whenever I need to. And whenever you're stuffing your kick drum, you're basically taking this boomy plume of a kick drum sound and you're shortening or you're deadening the kick drum to be what you want it to be. So instead of it ringing out for a half note or a whole note, you're shortening the note. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this pink blanket and I'll fold it a few times and I'll push it into the kick drum, and I want to try to touch the batter side and the resonant side going long ways, okay? So if this is the kick pedal and this is the resonant side, I want the blanket to be touching just a little bit here to go across the kick drum and to be laying on the resonant side. If you're moving your drums around a lot, it's going to be impossible for you to keep it from touching one side or another. So I usually just commit and I say, all right, well, I'm just going to let it touch both sides and hope that it stays in the same spot. Now here's what that sounds like. Now I'm taking the pink blanket out and I'm going with something that's a lot lighter. So this is some stuff that's used for pillow stuffing. It's kind of like cotton balls. You can tear it. It's about the lightest material that I have. Let's just put a sheet of it inside the kick drum and see what kind of change it makes, if anything. The more density you add to the middle of your kick drum, the more it's going to affect the sound. So with the cotton, I'm going to actually add a sweater, which was one of our daughter's sweaters. It's a little bit of thickness and it's a little bit heavier than the cotton balls are. Let's hear what that sounds like. To take it one step further, I want to grab the pink blanket that we were using earlier, stuff it back inside the kick drum with all the other stuff, and let's hear what that sounds like. In all these examples that you've heard of the kick drum, let me know in the comments below which one was your favorite. What's your preference when you're tuning your kick drum? Do you add stuff into your kick drum? How much stuff do you add? What kind of materials do you use? I'd be interested to know. As mentioned before, I'd greatly appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and we'll see you next time as we look at the toms, how to make your toms sound better. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.